There is this very quiet, almost embarrassing contradiction that sits right at the center of pretty much every modern mission-driven organization.
Hmm.
It's the elephant in the room that, well, nobody really wants to feed, but it's definitely taking up space.
And you see it everywhere. It's
Yeah,
especially loud in churches and nonprofits, but honestly, you see it in the corporate world too.
absolutely. We have these massive, inspiring mission statements about changing the world, about impact, about sending good out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's the plaque on the lobby wall. We exist to reach the world. It's bold, it's outward facing.
The plaque on the wall, exactly. Or the tagline on the website. But here's the contradiction, and once you see it, you just can't unsee it.
Hmm.
While the mission is, to send people out, almost every single metric we use to measure our success is designed to calculate how many people we keep close.
It's the retention trap.
Mm.
And it's so subtle because it looks and feels like success.
It really does. I mean, we count the bodies in the room, we obsess over retention rates of top talent, we measure the budget, the square footage of the facility. If the parking lot is full, hey, we're winning.
Right.
And today, we're doing a deep dive into a stack of material, specifically a manifesto called Missional Leadership, Redefining Success, that suggests something pretty radical.
It really does. It argues that these metrics, the ones we celebrate, the ones we put in the annual report, might actually be working against the very mission we claim to be serving.
The provocative thesis.
It is. The source material is essentially asking a very uncomfortable question. What if you are winning at leadership by all the standard definitions?
The MBA playbook.
Exactly. The MBA play.
Yeah.
Bigger rooms, stable staff, surplus budget.
Yeah.
But by the standard of your actual mission, you're failing.
That is the terrifying question we're tackling today. We're going to unpack this clash between two fundamental economic models, accumulation versus multiplication.
And we're going to look at why the text argues that intentional loss, actually planning to lose your best people, your best assets, might be the only path to real growth.
Which just runs contrary to every survival instinct a leader has.
Oh, completely. Your biological imperative as a leader is to gather, protect, and keep.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start there. Let's unpack the accumulation trap. Because the source material doesn't villainize this. It acknowledges accumulation feels good, it feels safe. If I'm a leader and my team is growing, my parking lot is jammed, nobody wants to quit, I feel like a genius, I sleep well at night.
And you should, on some level. To be fair, the text makes it clear that these indicators, they aren't inherently evil. Rising attendance, expanding buildings, they usually signal health and competence.
Right, you don't get a full parking lot by being terrible at what you do.
But the author calls this the quiet contradiction.
Yeah.
Because of what happens next. It's the secondary effect that gets you.
The unintended consequence of safety.
Exactly. When success is defined primarily by retention, by keeping people and resources, the organization naturally, calcifies. You become risk-averse.
You stop making bold moves because a bold move might upset the equilibrium you've worked so hard to build.
And you become inward-facing. To use the text metaphor, which I love, you spend all your energy maintaining the aquarium instead of fishing in the ocean.
That image stuck with me. Maintaining the aquarium. You're scrubbing the glass, checking the pH levels, but you've forgotten the ocean entirely.
And that aligns with this distinction the source makes between organizational vitality and gospel faithfulness.
Which I think for a lot of leaders, those two things feel like the same thing. If the organization is vital, we must be faithful.
But the source argues they can be completely decoupled. This is the danger zone. You can have a growing organization that is, to use their phrase, missionally stalled.
Missionally stalled.
The machinery is running perfectly. The lights are on, payroll is met, the coffee is excellent. But the footprint of the mission isn't actually expanding. It's just getting heavier in one spot.
So we've professionalized preservation. We've gotten incredible at keeping things fresh in the fridge, but we aren't cooking dinner for anyone else.
That's a great way to put it. And the argument here is that leadership models built on preservation will eventually suffocate. Meanwhile, models built on sending on, giving things away, will shape the future.
This brings us to the core mechanics. A shift from accumulation to multiplication.
Right. Think in terms of force. Accumulation is centripetal. It pulls everything toward the center. Resources, talent, attention, all of it. The logic is, if we build a massive, impressive center, we can do more good.
The standard attractional model, come and see, build it and they will come.
Precisely. But multiplication is centrifugal. It releases resources to the edges. It pushes outward. And the source offers this really this almost haunting metric for this new mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It says we have to stop asking how large did we become and start asking how far did obedience travel?
How far did obedience travel? Wow, that is such a heavy shift.
Isn't it?
Because if I'm measuring how large did it become, I can do that with a clicker. But if I'm measuring how far did obedience travel, I have to look at where my people went when they left.
It changes the scorecard entirely. The source uses this analogy of a holding institution versus a sending base. A holding institution is a reservoir. It's static. A sending base is a pipeline. The water is supposed to move through it.
If the water stays in the pipe, you have a clog, not a pipeline.
Exactly.
And this leads to what I think is the aha moment of the text, but also the most painful part for any manager. It says, what if your strongest leader's leaving was not a loss, but evidence of health?
That's the line that makes managers sweat. I can just feel the anxiety in that statement.
Right. I read that and immediately thought about the practical reality. If my best leaders leave, the quality of my product drops. The anxiety of losing momentum is incredibly real.
And the source validates that anxiety.
Yeah.
It admits that sending is painful. It doesn't pretend it's efficient in the short term, but it counters with a perspective on resilience. It argues that retention-driven leadership often leads to fragile growth.
Fragile in what way? Because usually we think of retention as stability.
It feels like stability, but it's actually dependency. It relies on specific people staying in specific seats. If your success depends on Susan never leaving, you are fragile.
You're one resignation letter away from a crisis.
That's it.
Yeah.
So sending actually forces resilience because it forces you to reproduce. If your goal is to send your all-stars out, you have no choice but to constantly develop the bench.
You have to be in the business of manufacturing leaders, not just hoarding them. So the fear of loss actually reveals our development pipeline is broken. We're afraid to send because we haven't replaced.
Precisely. The pain of loss is actually a symptom of a lack of reproduction.
I want to ground this in the history the source provides because these aren't just modern management theories. It pulls up some case studies that are, well, they're frankly mind-blowing. The big one is the Antioch model from Acts 13.
This is the archetype. The context is crucial. The church in Antioch is at its absolute peak. Vibrant, spirit-filled, great teaching, diverse. This is the it church of the first century.
Right, they are crushing it. And then in the middle of a prayer meeting, the Spirit says, set apart Barnabas and Saul for me.
Now we have to pause on those names. Barnabas and Saul. These were not the interns.
No.
Barnabas was the cultural glue.
Yeah.
Saul. He's the intellectual heavyweight, the primary teacher.
In modern terms, that's like Apple giving away Steve Jobs and Jony Ive right at the height of the iPhone launch.
Exactly. It looks like a terrible strategic move for the local branch. If you're on the board at Antioch, you're voting no. You're saying,
Yeah.
we need them here to sustain the grid.
But the text highlights that they didn't send their surplus. They sent their best.
And the result wasn't the collapse of Antioch. The result was the explosion of the faith into the Western world. It was a massive win for the global mission, but it required a significant loss for the local hub.
Local loss for global gain. That is the tension. The text also mentions Jesus and the 72 disciples from Luke 10. What stands out there about readiness? Because I feel like that stops a lot of leaders. Well, they aren't ready.
What's fascinating there is the timing. Jesus sends them out ahead of him. But if you look at the disciples in the Gospels, they are rarely portrayed as ready. They're confused, they're bickering.
They're missing the point constantly.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Yet, he sends them. The source highlights that trust precedes perfection. He sent them before they were fully baked.
He didn't wait for them to get a certification.
No. The act of going is part of the training. You learn to swim by getting in the water.
The mission trip is the discipleship program, not the graduation ceremony.
Exactly.
There's one more historical example that really landed hard for me. The Moravians. This one is, well, it's intense.
The Moravians are the gold standard for this logic of loss. In the 18th century, this small community sent out more missionaries in 2 decades than the rest of Protestantism had in 2 centuries. But the cost was staggering. The text mentions that some were so desperate to reach enslaved people in the Caribbean that the missionaries were willing to sell themselves into indentured service just to get access to the plantations.
That is just, it's unbelievable. It completely reframes our modern discussions about work-life balance.
It's the ultimate refutation of the comfort metric. Success for them wasn't, did we stay safe? It was, did the message get to those who hadn't heard? They measured success by deployment, not retention.
It really forces you to check your own definition of success. But this idea of diminishment, of becoming less so the mission can become more, it has deep theological roots. The source calls it the theology of diminishment.
And it anchors this in the words of John the Baptist. He must increase, but I must decrease.
Right.
And I think the source makes a sharp observation here about our celebrity leader culture. We want both to increase. We want Jesus to be famous, but we want to be famous too.
He must increase, and I'd like to at least retain my market share.
Exactly. But the kingdom often operates on a win-lose dynamic for the leader. You lose control, you lose credit, so the kingdom wins. Look at Paul's strategy. He was notoriously inefficient by our standards.
He would go to a city, plant a community, invest heavily, and then he'd leave.
He'd leave. He didn't stay to build a mega complex. And this is the counterintuitive economics of the kingdom described in the text. What you hoard, you eventually lose to stagnation. What you release, God multiplies.
So if we buy into this, how do we actually do it without collapsing the organization next Tuesday? The source gets pretty practical here with a section called Building a Sending Pipeline.
It does. It moves from theology to mechanics. And the first practical step is jarring because it involves money. It says you have to budget for loss.
Budget for it, like a line item in the spreadsheet.
A literal line item. Most organizations budget for retention raises, bonuses, perks. The source suggests you should have a budget for sending. Costs for training replacements, costs for supporting the people you send out.
It puts your money where your mission is. If you're spending 99% of your budget on retaining people, you aren't a sending organization, you're a holding company.
Correct. And then there's the cultural piece. The text talks about commissioning ceremonies.
This is huge. Usually when someone leaves, it's treated like a funeral. Or worse, a betrayal. We poured into you, and now you're leaving us.
Right. It feels like a divorce. The source says we need to flip that script. We need to publicly celebrate departures as wins. If someone leaves to go do something amazing for the mission, throw a party.
Bring them on stage.
Yes. Make it clear to everyone left behind that this is what success looks like. It changes the scorecard for everyone else.
The goal isn't just to sit here. The goal is to be deployed.
It also proposes new questions for the leadership meeting. Instead of just asking who stayed, ask who was sent. Instead of how big is the budget, ask are resources flowing toward the unreached.
It also talks about identifying different types of leaders. It uses the language of pioneers versus settlers. I feel like every organization has both, but we usually treat them the same.
This is critical. Some people are settlers. They are great at maintaining and stabilizing. We need them. But some are pioneers. They need new frontiers. If you try to keep a pioneer in a settler role,
They get bored, they start breaking things just to see what happens.
exactly, they get restless, they become critical.
Yeah.
You have to give them permission to go. You have to identify those apostolic gifts and say, we aren't going to hoard you, we're going to launch you.
That requires a level of security in the leader. That is, well, it's rare. It means looking at your top performer and saying, you're too good for us to keep.
It does. And that brings us to the tension. We have to acknowledge the human cost.
Yeah, let's be real. It
Yep.
hurts to lose your best friend on staff. It hurts to lose the worker who knows all the passwords. It's inconvenient. It makes your job harder tomorrow morning.
It validates that pain. It doesn't say don't be sad, but it clarifies the theological root of the struggle. Stewardship versus ownership.
Break that down. That feels like the pivot point.
A leader often feels like an owner. This is my team, my department. So losing something is a net loss to your net worth. But if you are a steward, manager of someone else's property, your job is to deploy those assets where the owner wants them.
And people are entrusted, not possessed.
Exactly. You don't own your staff. They're entrusted to you for a season. If the owner says move that asset and you say no, you aren't being a good leader, you're being a bad steward.
You're embezzling the talent.
Oof. Yes, embezzling the talent.
The source has a section on discernment that I found helpful because it distinguishes courage from recklessness.
Right. I'm multiplying, I fired the accountant. No, that's just chaos. The source says courage isn't recklessness, it's obedience over predictability. And it gives a litmus test for decisions.
Okay.
Leaders should ask, will this honor Christ's mission, even if it diminishes my influence?
That's the ego killer right there. Even if it diminishes my influence.
That's the hard part. We are wired to protect our influence. We think, if I have more influence, I can do more good. But this says the mission is more important than the messenger.
You stop asking what is safest for us and start asking what is best for the kingdom.
And sometimes what is best for the kingdom is that your organization gets smaller so the kingdom can get bigger. You lost, but the kingdom won.
Such a countercultural thought. We're conditioned to believe bigger is always better, but the biology of the kingdom seems to be that reproduction is better than bloating.
Well said. We've moved from the safety of the aquarium to the risk of the open ocean.
And we've seen that historically, the groups that actually changed the world were the ones who refused to play it safe. They understood that the ultimate key performance indicator, the ultimate KPI, wasn't their own survival.
It was the Great Commission. It requires a death to self-preservation.
The source leaves us with a final, haunting question. And I want every listener, whether you run a Fortune 500 team or just a small nonprofit, to sit with this. The question is, was Christ made known where he was not before because I led faithfully?
That cuts through all the noise, doesn't it? It doesn't ask if you were popular, if you built a building, or if you retained 95% of your staff.
It asks about access. Did your leadership create access to the gospel in a new place? It's a complete shift. It means looking at the empty chair in your staff meeting, not as a hole to be plugged.
But as the seed that was planted somewhere else, it reframes the empty chair as a victory. It turns the loss into a launch.
So here's our challenge to you. The next time you feel that pang of anxiety because a key person is leaving, pause. Don't view it as a funeral. View it as a launch pad.
Ask yourself, how far will obedience travel this time?
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for swimming in the deep end with us.
Until next time.